If I asked you to tell me your story, where would you start? Most people will say the beginning, but the most engaging stories rarely start there. That's why a Witness Project story isn't your testimony. It's one story, one moment from your testimony that clearly shows God at work in your life. The biggest mistake people make is that they think that we want their whole life story. Okay, so I grew up in a Christian home, but I didn't really know what it meant to have a personal relationship with Jesus until high school when I joined youth group. And then when I went to college, I met this girl and I was able to share Christ with her. And it was just the most amazing moment, and we're still friends to this day. And I'm so grateful for that time in my life and for the ways that God worked through me to help her. Nothing about that story is wrong. It's just not a Witness Project story. It's trying to summarize your whole life while we're looking for something much smaller. Much smaller. Say you needed a map for your travels. You wanted to see what the city would look like. Would it help for you to have a map of the entire United States, a map of all of Wisconsin, or a map of Green Lake County? Probably the last one. The same applies for telling your story. While you could start at the very beginning and give the whole picture, show the whole United States, you could also narrow in on one specific moment, one specific town that's going to be really relevant for your audience. So think about, what was one phone call I had? What was one conversation I had? What was one moment where I acted differently because of my faith in Jesus than I would have had I not known him? Now, that doesn't mean that every story happened in a single afternoon. Maybe God called you to start a ministry, and through that, you've been working there for 10 years and have had some amazing experiences. But what I want you to do, focus on a single family. Focus on how they were impacted by your work, how they saw God through you. That's a Witness Project story. We want to take the big and narrow it down into the real moments that people can visualize and see the actual impact that your work through the Lord has had on people. When we say Christian faith in action, we're not just talking about Christians talking about Jesus. We're talking about Christians living like Jesus. And sometimes that's through words, but very often it's through love. One teacher told us, even though I can't technically talk about God in schools, my life is a testimony of God in schools. I love that. Every day she walks into her classroom determined to show people the love of Christ through her actions, her kindness, and her compassion. That's faith in action. Now, when it comes to telling your story, there's one thing that's really important to remember, and that's to try and avoid Christian jargon. Remember, we want everyone to be able to understand what we're saying. So make sure to switch out some words that make sense to you, but might not make sense to someone who doesn't yet know Jesus. So instead of saying, God laid it on my heart, try, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Or I felt convicted, switch to, I realized I needed to change. Instead of God opened a door, say, an opportunity came along that I never expected. You don't have to remove God from your story. In fact, we really don't want you to. But we want to make sure that what you're saying is in a language that everyone can understand. That way, everyone can glean something from it. Are you ready for one of the biggest storytelling secrets? People don't just remember summaries, they remember images. So instead of telling me what happened, show me. Instead of saying I worked at a school, say every morning I stood outside room 214 greeting students as they walk through the door. Instead of saying God provided, say I still keep that handwritten note folded inside my Bible. Instead of saying we helped families, say I'll never forget the mother who whispered, I didn't know where else to go. The best stories give people something to picture, a person, an object, or a place. That's what people remember. So show them what you experienced, don't just tell them. I grew up watching the movie We Bought a Zoo, and in it there's this infamous line, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come of it. And while that line hasn't exactly been a guidepost in my life, On my first week of college, it came back to me. I was walking around campus one day and my backpack straps were digging into my shoulders and every bench where I wanted to study was full. And I was so annoyed and I felt so righteously upset about all these things that weren't going my way. And then all of a sudden, I walked past this girl that was sitting alone. And I'm not the type to just walk up to someone and start talking to them, but I saw her and something in me just knew that she needed someone to talk to her. So I was standing there with my too tight backpack and annoyance at the general situation, and I said to myself, okay, 20 seconds of insane courage. I'm going to go up to her and we're gonna see if something great will happen. And so I walked up to her, nervous and shaking, and I'm sure she could hear it in my voice, and I said, "Hi, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm gonna go get a coffee. Would you like to join me?" And she looked up to me with just the most amount of curiosity and yet baffling expression in her eyes. And she said, yeah, I would. That sounds good. And in that time, I learned that she was in a really tough spot in her life in that moment. And she was just sitting there praying. She was like, "Lord, I feel alone. It's the first week at college. I came to meet friends and I have nobody. Lord, can you please just send me a friend?" And sure enough, the Lord was talking to me in my life, and he stopped me in my tracks and he said, "Emma, do what Matt Damon has taught you and use your 20 seconds of courage, and I promise you something great will come out of it." So what's the point of sharing your story? Great question. Glad you asked. For most people, the loudest stories they hear about Christians aren't stories about love. They've heard and lived stories about hurt, division, and hypocrisy. But that's not the whole story, because every day, teachers, nurses, police officers, students, neighbors are quietly loving others because Jesus first loved them. Most of these stories don't make the news, but they're happening and they deserve to be told. Because when people see Christians loving others, they're really seeing something about God. So to recap, don't try to tell us your whole life. Tell us that one conversation, that one phone call, the moment, because those are the stories that people remember. They're the stories that help people see God at work, and they're exactly the stories that the Witness Project is looking for. So find your moment and help us tell the stories that the world needs to hear.